Sound advice?
Sound advice that
Pretty
everybody
simple.
can understand.
Novel idea, really.
Pretty good.
Honestly. There you go, guys. Use that. Anyway, someone who we've often featured on this show. It's a big story, and it's to do with climate change, and it is, of course, Peter Ridd, the marine biologist from the Great Barrier Reef, who basically has been explaining that, in his opinion, there's a lot of scaremongering about the Great Barrier Reef, which is not true. Now, we know the story. I won't go into the specific details because it's going to be a legal case, and we're going to be talking to Gideon Rozner in a second about it. But we have spoken to Peter as well. He's in court, and it's to do with the fact that he's no longer at the university where he made those predictions. But first of all, here's a little bit of a film which Gideon Rozner and the IPA have put together about Peter Ridd's current fight.
But this is a place of higher learning. This is a place of supposedly open intellectual inquiry.
And that's the problem. If this was a company, well, they sort of own you, right? But this is a university, and if these sorts
public
of...
institution.
A public institution, public money is being used here, and to use that to do these sorts of things is a disgrace to what a university should actually be.
Would it be fair to say that in the 21st century at our universities, the old ethic of the search for the truth at the very least has been diluted?
I think that's definitely true, yeah. I mean, it's in the funding as well, that you've just got to go along with whatever's the flavour of the month.
And what in particular attracts the most funding? I can hazard a guess, but...
Yeah, well, you've got to say climate change at least half a dozen times in any application to have any chance at all.
And that's Peter Ridd talking to Gideon Rozner. Now, I'm delighted to say that although Peter's not with us, Gideon is. Gideon, of course, very popular with Outsiders. Gideon, welcome back to Outsiders.
Thank you, Rowan. It's great to be back on Outsiders.
You looked very comfortable up there up near the Great Barrier Reef with Peter Ridd.
Look, it was a fantastic trip, I must say. I mean, I got to go and see a bit of Townsville. It's a beautiful town. The weather's fantastic. And best news of all, the reef, according to Peter, is in terrific shape.
Fantastic. So he's facing court, so I gather there's, legalities we've got to dance around. But tell us what you can, and also tell us his opinions on the reef and so on.
Well, I should point out that actually everything I'm telling you about the case is in public court documents which the IPA have obtained from the court registry. But basically, Peter Ridd has been a marine geophysicist at James Cook University for a long time. He's been studying the reef for over 35 years, but he does disagree with this idea that we see in the media that the reef is dying because of climate change. For speaking out against that zeitgeist, Peter Ridd has been dragged by university administrators to all manner of closed-door meetings. He's been hit with censure motions, with gag orders, with warnings, and finally had his employment terminated last year. But while a lot of other people would have gone quietly and tried to, go with the flow to preserve their careers, Peter is fighting back. He has brought action before the Federal Circuit Court, and the hearing begins next week.
Now, one of the big issues that Peter brought to our attention on Outsiders was this question of peer review. So, and this is what seemed to get him in trouble. So the idea is we always read, oh, it's a peer-reviewed document, therefore it must be important. He argued, he looked at the peer-reviewed documents and said, well, actually, they didn't even do the experiments. It's nonsense. Tell us a little bit about that.
Correct, and that was a point that Peter made in a chapter he wrote for our publication, Climate Change, The Facts, 2017. Now, we hear in the media about the Great Barrier Reef, but also about climate change in general. Oh, 95% of scientists agree. It's all peer-reviewed. Well, peer review in most instances is really nothing more than a scientist mate looking at the paper to, make sure that it checks out spelling and grammar okay. But Peter points to something he calls the replication crisis, where as much as 50% of peer-reviewed science may very well be wrong, especially when it comes to the reef. So peer review is not a guarantee of authenticity that its proponents say that it is.
Well, we found that out with Sokol Squared, didn't we? Where they actually ran this hoax where they just put up these absolutely absurd assertions, and they got peer-reviewed, and they got all this acclaim. What I don't understand is, if in this area of science, how could there possibly be any objection to inquiry and questions, and where does it come, this blind belief? It's almost like sacrilegious to question it. It seems so polar to what you'd expect scientists to be.
Well, as Peter Ridd has said, that to question the orthodoxy on climate change and the reef can be a career-limiting move. Now, my personal view is I think there are a lot of incentives now for there to be a crisis. Malcolm Turnbull wouldn't have given almost $500 million to an organisation nobody had ever heard of unless there was a problem to solve. Saying the reef is hunky-dory is not as profitable as saying it's fine. Now, again, that's my personal view, but I think that has a lot to do with it.
This guy's just a marine biologist. I've had Prince Harry and Leonardo DiCaprio tell me the reef is in all sorts of trouble.
And
I'm
President Obama.
Because the science is settled, Rita.
James.
But so how can the science be settled if you've actually got people like Peter Ridd who are actually saying, well, no, it's not? I mean, shouldn't Australians, people around the world, really be concerned that there's a crisis in all of academia around this kind of confirmation bias that, well, once we've all decided that this is a thing, the same people who think that something's a thing will only confirm those papers that say the thing is the thing.
That's right. And we hear, again, you know, there may be academics out there who do take an issue with Peter Ridd's thought. Let's debate that openly. Let's debate that in the name of scientific inquiry.
But he's got data, right?
He absolutely does have data, and his allegations about the reef and about peer review have never actually been refuted. He has just
So tell us what his thoughts are on the reef. How safe or...
What's the data say?
Peter Ridd has said that the Great Barrier Reef is one of the most pristine natural environments in the world, second only to places like Antarctica. Now, coral bleaching is supposedly this effect that shows that the reef is dying. Firstly, it's only affecting a very small part of the reef anyway. It is happening. Corals are developing, you know, the ghostly white colour that you see on TV. But according to Peter's research, this is actually a phenomenon that allows coral to adjust to higher temperatures. It's actually a natural process. Don't forget, corals grow in all sorts of other warmer climates. They grow around Thailand, they grow around India, they grow very close to the equator. There's no, the bleaching effect, it doesn't look great on TV and makes for some good headlines, but if you drill down to some scientific facts, it's actually not a sign that the reef is dying, and that's doing a great disservice to tourism operators around the reef, to people in Townsville.
And what about the... I guess the idea that, you know, you can have coal mines shut down because of the threat to the reef, you can have farming industry and so on all being shut down. How big is the ramification of the alarmism about the reef?
Well, in addition
Where does it stretch?
Well, in addition to tourism operators, because I don't know how many people are going to visit, you know, the Great Barrier Reef if Barack Obama is saying that his daughters won't be able to see it when they grows up. I think that was bad for jobs and for the region. But again, it's being used to shut down coal mines and projects like Adani. It's been used to have a go at the sugar industry. And now...
These are all jobs, particularly up in Townsville. Just briefly, what is Peter looking forward to this week? What's happening?
So the Federal Circuit Court will hear the case on Tuesday.
What are you and he and we hoping for?
Well, I'll be up there covering the case for the IPA, and if anybody's interested, sign up at ipa.org.au/Peter Ridd for updates. Peter's seeking reinstatement as well as another
back to the university.
Back to the university as well as other legal remedies. But look, this is going to be a big case because JCU would have you believe it's just a narrow dispute about a contract. It's about more than that. It's about academic freedom. It's about free intellectual inquiry. And to the credit of the National Tertiary Education Union, they have built an academic freedom clause into Peter's enterprise bargaining agreement. If that's not held up by the court, this right to academic freedom as has been put out in a contract, then what hope do our universities have?
Amazing. Thank you, Gideon Rozner. So good to have you back on Outsiders. We'll get you back soon to talk about what happens in the court case. We'll look forward to hearing that. Thanks, Gideon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, mate. And we'll be back in a tick with a Queenslander, another Outsiders favourite, Amanda Stoker. Back in a tick.